All right, I will call the meeting to order. As a preliminary matter, this is Brendan Tedstone, Select Board Chair. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond to the affirmative. Irfan Nasrullah.
Here.
Brian Herr.
Here.
Mary Jo Lafreniere. Amy Ritterbush.
Here.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Norman Kamalu.
Here.
Elaine Lazarus.
Here.
All right. Additional speakers this evening may include Tim O'Leary, Ellen Scanlon, and Donald Voner. If there's anyone attending who would like to speak during public forum of the agenda, you must notify the meeting host in advance. You may do so by using the raise hand feature of Zoom. If you're here to speak at one of the public hearings tonight, you will have an opportunity to speak at that time. It is not necessary to raise your hand now. This open meeting of the Hopkins Select Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we're complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted in the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. For this meeting, the Select Board is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda, identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM on one or many of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some of the attendees participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We're now turning to the first end of the agenda. First item of the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective, clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Not every agenda item will feature public comment for the public forum of the agenda. The chair will work with the meeting host to call on each pre-registered speaker to make their comment. Each speaker must begin by identifying their name and address. Each speaker will have up to 2 minutes for their comments. Please use the raise hand feature of Zoom now to indicate that you'd like to make a comment. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Pledge of Allegiance. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Public forum. Is there any member who wishes to speak? If so, please use the raise hand feature of Zoom. Let's see. Attendee, full attendee list. All right, I see nobody. Oh, I'm sorry. Phil, looks like Phil M would be the first person. So I believe my host is Ben. Ben, if you could liven Phil M up.
My name's Phil Mastriani, and this is my first time at a town meeting. So it might actually make sense for me to wait till the public forum. It's just relating to the potential bylaw for the firearm discharge. Would now be the time to talk, or is it later?
I believe that's, I don't know if, Norman, is that on our agenda for a little bit later?
Yeah, that's later.
Yeah. So
okay,
Phil,
well, you can mute me and I'll wait till then.
All right, sounds good. So,
Mr. Chair, is that a public hearing later on for the firearms or no?
Through the chair, it's not a public hearing. The board will be discussing whether that article will be added on the warrant or not.
Are we going to entertain public comment at that time?
Board may choose to do so. And in fact, in this case, because Mr. Mastrian is the one who has been behind it and discussing with staff for over a year, I would suggest to the board, to the chair, that he consider allowing him to speak.
Yep.
Okay.
Duly noted, and I would allow only Mr. Mastriani to speak, since he has been the catalyst to this entire article, as well as made himself available at public comment. So Mastriani will be able to speak during that time. Looks like we have Eric Rocky, who is the next person, and that'll be it for public comment.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just, I would like to speak on the Cornell's issue when it comes around.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to see if that's a public. That is a public hearing, so you'll have the ability to speak during that hearing. So
Okay, thank you.
you're back on mute, and we'll come back to you during then. All right, the FY 2022 consolidated budget submission. Mr. Kamalu.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And tonight, as directed by the Select Board, I'm delivering two different budget proposals. One with a 2.5% tax impact on existing property owners, and a second with a lower 1.0 tax impact on existing property owners. These proposals are comprehensively covered in a detailed 29-page transmittal memorandum included in the Select Board meeting package. I've also shared it with the school superintendent, we shared it with the school committee, and Tim has shared it with the appropriations committee. 11 months into the COVID-19 public health emergency, the town, the Commonwealth, and the nation remain in a severe emergency circumstances. Tonight's budget proposals are recovery budgets focused on these recovery priorities. 1, sustaining municipal services, including educational services at FY21 levels. 2, meeting contractual obligations. 3, funding targeted service expansions in the Hopkinton Public Schools, and I should say, our exceptional Hopkinton Public Schools, and health and human service programs related to both town growth and the COVID-19 public health emergency. I want to underscore that, related to both town growth and the COVID-19 public health emergency. And finally, resuming funding of the town's capital renewal program in a measured way, taking advantage of the historically low borrowing rates currently available. The proposals before you are possible because the town was fiscally prudent when times were good, establishing reserves for just such an emergency as this. The proposals focus on keeping Hopkinton strong and on continuing to deliver essential services as the community weathers this crisis together, with the belief that Hopkinton is on a very positive long-term growth trajectory, and that avoiding steep service cuts is both desirable and achievable. Both budget proposals balance spending, the use of reserves, and tax impact in ways that meet service level expectations, with sensitivity to tax impact, while managing the adverse impacts on the town's long-term financial health and stability. It is noteworthy that under both proposals, property tax revenues from new growth, which is estimated at $2 million, would continue to provide more new funding than the tax increases on the levy base will provide. Fundamentally, every budget in every year is a trade-off between service delivery and tax impact. That trade-off is especially sensitive during this pandemic. I believe every household and enterprise in Hopkinton has been seriously impacted by COVID-19. But I'm also well aware that some households in our community have been economically hurt to a much greater degree than other more fortunate households. This recovery budget is an effort to provide needed services to people on both ends of that impact spectrum, but to do so with sensitivity to those who are most financially impacted. To manage the immediate financial impact of sustaining, and in some cases expanding key services, both proposals forwarded tonight call for using a portion of the town's accumulated financial reserves to bridge this recovery year. This is something that was avoidable in developing the FY21 recovery budget, but which is now required to sustain recovery priorities entering this second full fiscal year of the COVID-19 crisis. At this point, let me share my screen here that will allow you to see how we are using our stabilization account to address this crisis. The table on the left of the screen shows the current status of stabilization accounts held by both the general fund and the school department, also showing what the impact on stabilization balances would be from the two budget alternatives provided. For the general fund stabilization accounts, with a current balance at 4.48% of the proposed operating budget, the 2.5 tax impact budget would drop the general fund stabilization balance to 3.65% of the proposed operating budget, while the 1.0 tax impact budget would drop the general fund stabilization balance to 3.51% of the proposed operating budget. Hopkinton's financial policies aim for stabilization reserves at 5% of the operating budget, exactly to prepare for situations like the town is in today. I have developed the proposed use of stabilization reserves in fiscal year 2022 to specifically recognize that further draws from reserves may be appropriate in FY23 and even in FY24 if the recovery is slower than hoped for. Recommending the use of 18.5% of available general fund reserves under the 2.5% tax impact proposal and 21.6% of available general fund reserves under the 1.0 tax impact proposal is a balanced, conservative approach to using reserves, one that recognizes the uncertain tempo of the eventual recovery. I would also like to call your attention to the amount of one-time funding used to balance the operating budget under both tax impact scenarios. As a baseline, it's important to remember that in developing the FY21 budget, the town suspended the capital spending program to keep a focus on sustaining services during the pandemic. And in doing so, the town used $1.03 million of one-time funding to support recurring needs. That decision and its consequences roll forward into this budget. Under the 2.5 tax impact budget version, the amount of one-time funding supporting recurring needs would rise by $862,000 so that $1.9 million is one-time funding would support recurring needs. Under the 1.0 tax impact budget version, the amount of one-time funding supporting recurring needs will rise by approximately $993,000 so that $2 million in one-time funding would support recurring needs. Let me repeat, as I stated in supporting the limited use of one-time funding to balance the first COVID-19 budget for fiscal year 2021, this expanded use of one-time funding to support recurring costs is creating a bow wave that will have to be addressed after the COVID-19 recovery. Whether that is in FY23, FY24, or FY25, time will tell. The town has the financial strength to work through recovery in this way, but we must be very clear that this growing structural imbalance will have to be addressed when the situation is more stable. At this point, let me come off from sharing the screen. As an additional aspect of long-term concern, I wish to call your special attention to enclosures 2 and 5 of the budget memo, which provide a 5-year time horizon. These presentations highlight the structural budget gap that will continue to develop if growth, and I want to say this slowly, if growth in the costs of services substantially exceeds 2 to 4% over a period when additional revenue from new growth is projected to decline. When the town is growing substantially and revenue from new growth is flowing in, it is reasonable to think that some targeted services will need to expand modestly. However, the budget presentation shows clearly that in a period of historically low inflation, departmental commitments or aspirations that lock the town into cost growth above the 2 to 4% level will continue to require adjustment or intervention. The preparation of recovery budgets for FY21 and FY22 serve as a stark reminder that the town needs to be more deliberate, diligent, and transparent in ensuring that there is a focus on operating efficiency to match the town's clear commitment to effectiveness. On one level, rapidly rising property values reflect the community's success in delivering a great quality of life. But those rising values also reflect a challenge for seniors and working families of limited means. Along those lines, I take this opportunity to remind the community of the tax exemption program sponsored by the Board of Assessors, with information available on the assessors page on the town's website. I also remind residents about the tax relief offered by the town's Tax Relief Committee. In closing, let me remind the community that while this presentation is an important waypoint in the process, it is not the end of the process. The Select Board and Appropriations Committee will be conducting reviews and public hearings. As time passes, additional important information may become available about possible federal COVID-19 relief that could improve the town's situation, as well as information about likely levels of local aid from the Commonwealth, and improved fidelity on important estimates like contributions from new growth. We are really only beginning the public phase of this important process. I would like to thank all the volunteers, our most valuable volunteers on town boards, committees, and commissions for their contributions to the development of this budget. Likewise, professional staff in town departments spent countless hours getting the budget to this point. I look forward to working with the select board and other contributors in the coming weeks to review and refine the budget proposals as we build toward a sound recovery budget for consideration by town meeting. We will be posting meeting notices for review sessions and public hearings on the budget in the coming weeks. And I look forward to detailed discussions on the budget in those sessions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cavallo, and thank you for such a inclusive report. That was very well done. Board members, do you have anything? Mr. Nasrullah?
I just want to thank Mr. Kamalu for a wonderful job. I think you've really kind of laid it all out in the two forms. One thing, just a general comment is, I think we've been diligent in our work, so leading up to this point while times were good, and using that stabilization fund seems to make a lot of sense. But I thank you, Mr. Kamalo, for really pointing out that we also need to look towards the future. And I think that's something we all need to keep in mind, that just this COVID ending now does not mean that the fiscal impact ends now. So that's all.
I love your wonderful optimism that COVID is ending now.
Sorry, let me rephrase.
We obviously work in occupations.
We see an end coming, hopefully, very soon.
Mr. Herr.
Thank you, Mr. Kamalo, for the presentation, and I appreciate two different scenarios. I know we're early in the process, and whatever we say tonight will not be etched in stone. So please don't take my comments or others for that matter to be how this is going to play out, because we've got months of work yet ahead of us. I'm a little confused. You may have touched on it. I did have to go off screen for a minute to eat my dinner, so I was listening, but I may have been distracted by my burrito. The 2.5 the 2.5 with the 750K approximately surplus funds addition balances that budget at 2.5, or do we have a budget deficit even at 2.5?
At 2.5, tapping the reserves at that level will balance the budget. Equally, we're looking for an equal amount that may come from the other stabilization fund on the school side.
Okay, so that's both sides kicking in a little bit there. I should use the word side, but that's both entities within town kicking in that funding, and that funding comes from the HCA for the school portion for growth. Is that correct?
Yes, but I think, again, at this point, we'll still need to engage with the school committee. It's their decision on how those funds are applied. However, what we're simply pointing out is that there is a budget gap, and the town, we're recommending that the town look at the reserves as a possible source for closing that gap. Again,
Okay.
very early in the process.
And that's part of the work that we would typically do going forward over the next 2 or 3 months. But to add to that, then a second scenario, which is this 1% net, net of new growth tax impact for current residents. We're going up to 950K of funds from stabilization and an equal or roughly equal amount from school stabilization. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is that then still funding the schools and our other departments at the submitted or requested or approved numbers that we have to date for each department, or are we going to have to make cuts there too?
With the 1% tax impact budget, the town will need to make cuts on spending.
Do we have any kind of magnitude on those numbers yet, or is that a little too early?
Yeah, we do have a sense as to what those numbers are, and with the chair's permission, I can ask either Ben or Tim to refresh my memory on what those numbers are.
You have the chair's permission, as long as the chair doesn't have to present it.
Yeah. Ben or Tim, do you want to chime in?
Good evening. Thank you. The difference between the 1% budget, Mr. Chairman, and the 2.5% budget is a $1,005,000 difference. And that is composed of really three areas of reduction. There would be an additional $132,000 taken from the General Stabilization Fund, as shown on enclosure 1 of the budget memo. There would be a substantial $688,000 reduction to the school department request for new initiatives. And there would be additional cuts from various town departments of another $185,800. And those things are laid out in the enclosures to the budget. And in both cases, the 2.5% and 1% budgets would be balanced with those cuts and with the contributions from the stabilization funds.
Hey, Mr. Kamal, if we go to 3.5% on that stabilization to budget ratio, what is that going to do to our bond rating that we've worked so hard for the last 20 years? If you had to guess.
Yeah, without giving.
Don't they have, what's their target number? Is it 4?
Yeah, I think the best way to answer your question is that having the stabilization funds at the levels that we're at has worked well in supporting our AAA rating. So I'm assuming that the reverse may be true.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm good for now. I'll probably have some more questions in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lafreniere? You're muted. You're muted, Mary Jo.
Yeah, I just spent a long time with Josh. There is something wrong with my computer and it showed up today and I'm having a terrible time, but we got to here, so I'm back in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna get a new one.
Ms. Ritterbusch?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for getting all this information together in our packet on Friday, because it really helped us have time to go through it over the weekend. And it's helpful. So if I understand correctly, it sounds like the 2.5% budget would be pretty close to level services, but the 1% would result in some cuts to requested services. Is that correct?
In fact, the 2.5% tax impact budget would support level services and enhancements.
Okay.
But the enhancements are primarily in the schools, is that correct?
As well as human services.
Okay.
2 areas that are under a lot of stress right now. Yeah.
So I'm really glad that we have stabilization funds, and if there's ever a year that we need to use them, I think this is the year. So I understand that we may have to take some from them. The 1% budget looked a little bit too lean to me, so I'm hoping that we don't have to go that low. But I'm also sensitive to people not having the income that they may usually have. So I hope maybe we'll get some more CARES aid or more aid from the state too, if we need to reduce a little bit. But let's see. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Should we get any comments from the school department? I think the superintendent is here if needed too.
So before we go there, if I could, and I kind of yielded some time, I think. The stabilization of $750,000, that's a lot of money in stabilization coming into a fiscal 1-year budget. When was the last time we drew from the stabilization fund, do you recall?
In fact, in my tenure here in town, I don't believe we have.
Yeah, we did draw in 2006 or 7, maybe it was 7 or 8, right before you came on, when the whole recession was kicking in. It wasn't a lot; it was 200 or 300 grand. So the $700,000 stabilization. I'm not saying I'm against it, so please don't etch anything in stone here. That's a big number for us. That's why I was asking about the bond rating, and that we're level servicing. To Mrs. Ritterbusch's point, we're level servicing, but really we're not, because we're taking money out of the bank. to level service. So I personally would like to see a way to figure this out so that we don't have to go to the 1%, but 750K out of stabilization and the erosion of our bond rating is also something that I believe will be problematic in a couple more years when things are going to be really tight. We need that nice interest rate and not have that interest rate creeping up on those capital projects that we're going to have to do to keep the town moving forward. So I like the 2.5. I don't like the 750K. So we got to figure that out.
I have a question. That's the same amount that the school was going to take out of their stabilization fund?
Yes.
It's equal from the school and the town share.
Well, I think the school gets to decide that, right?
Yeah, I know Norman and I discussed this yesterday on the phone quite a bit, and I'm kind of looking at the 2.5 budget too. I think, I don't know, this is what stabilization funds are made for, I guess, but we're going to have to concentrate on rebuilding it if we do use it.
I disagree with that, but we still have to see what kind of CARES Act money comes, and I think there's other sources of funding. And as Mr. Hurd said, this is very early in the process, so I understand not wanting to withdraw money, but at the same time, that's what it's there for. So let's see where this goes. But I'm definitely leaning towards the 2.5.
Yep. So I think that it's important to let this process play out. Let Mr. Khumalo do what he does. We're very early in this process, so it's senseless to fire the cannons right yet. Let's let Mr. Khumalo and Ms. Kavanaugh and all the others involved work their magic, and as they do every year, come up with a doable budget. So
it was a nice presentation. I thought Norman did a very good job when I went through it.
Yep. So thank you very much, Mr. Khumalo. Moving on to the consent agenda, the board will consider approving the consent agenda consisting of approval of the minutes of the select board meeting on January 11, accept a $5,000 gift to the Veteran Celebration Committee, and approval to sign notices of taking for Legacy Farms North, following up on the 2020 annual town meeting vote to accept the road as a public way. Board members, would you like to break any items out for a separate vote?
I just had a question, but it doesn't have to be a separate vote.
All right, let's get through this and then you can ask the question. So I will request a motion to approve the consent agenda. To approve the consent agenda.
So
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Now, Amy, what do you got?
Yeah, I was wondering, I thought we had already approved the taking of the Legacy Farms North. Is this a different portion?
Mr. Khumalo?
Yeah, thanks.
With your permission, Mr. Chair, Elaine, do you mind explaining?
It's a two-step process. The first
Okay.
is the order of taking, which is immediately followed with a notice of taking, which is the notice that goes out to the abutters.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
That's really yes.
Mr. Herr?
Or yes.
Lafreniere?
In front of you, yes.
Ritterbusch?
Ritterbusch, yes.
Headstone, yes. The 2021 annual town meeting. The select board will discuss the 2021 annual town meeting. The board has a list of potential warrant articles for submission in the meeting packet. The warrant closes on February 2. Our list is the following unique articles plus several recurring articles. Deferred from the 2020 annual town meeting, the new trench safety officer bylaw, the new street opening permit bylaw, the amend dog licensing bylaw to comply with the state statute with respect to the fine for failure to license dogs, the amendments to streets and sidewalks and vehicles and traffic bylaws, transfer from the general stabilization fund, first year of union contracts, tree protection, tree cutting bylaw, recurring articles or acceptance of town reports, last fiscal year supplemental appropriations and transfers, unpaid bills from previous fiscal years, excess bond premium, set the salary of elected officials, current fiscal year operating budget, revolving fund spending limits, Chapter 90 highway funds, transfer to other post-employment benefits liability trust fund, transfer to general stabilization fund, transfer to capital expense stabilization fund, pay-as-you-go capital expenses. And the board has already submitted a placeholder for discharge of firearms bylaw. Are there any members of the board that would like to break any of these issues out?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm curious if the town manager or Elaine could share with us which of those are not typical, administrative articles that we submit and act on each year at town meeting. What's different there? I heard something about there's firearms, right? That's a new one. Is there another new one or a couple other different ones for this year?
Yeah.
So the first 7 were new, I believe.
Okay.
Mr. Kamalu?
That is correct. And in fact, a clarifier point is that the majority of the first set were part of the 2021 annual town meeting. However, because of the decision to only focus on budget, we moved them to this annual town meeting.
So refresh our memory then on which one of those are not typical administrative functions of the board and town meeting.
Okay, it's the new trench safety officer bylaw, dog licensing, we're adding new language to an existing bylaw. Street opening, this is a new general bylaw. Obstructing public ways, that's a new bylaw. In fact, it's a revision to an existing bylaw. And then the draft discharge of firearms bylaw, that's new. And then the tree preservation bylaw is also new.
New meaning new to this town meeting coming up, and it was not pushed off from the previous town meeting.
Correct.
Any others?
And then the others, most of the financial articles are regular. They have regular appearances at town meeting on the town meeting warrant. However, I should point out the one regarding union contracts is something that is relatively new, and we're still discussing with town council and special labor council on how to handle that.
So that's a legal transaction that the state and the union laws at mass general level are going to drive. But certainly the gun discharge and the tree bylaw thing, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, those are new, really new. They were not on the warrant at the annual town meeting 21 as we are preparing for that meeting.
I think those are the two ones that we probably have to focus on, whether we want to put a warrant article out there or not. The rest of the stuff is what it is,
The tree cutting bylaw is kind of sponsored by the planning board, or it's part of their
According to the
purview. They want to see this bylaw. Is that right?
according to the packet, it says the select board is the sponsor.
I have some information if you want.
Okay, please, Amy.
So
Before we did that, Amy, why don't we, so are we all in agreement that all of that we can vote on all of the articles except for the discharge of firearms and the tree protection, tree cutting bylaw? So we will, kind of like the consent agenda item, we can lump those all together and say that we're good with those, with the exception of those other two, carve those out, and then we can vote on those prior 17, and then the other two we can go back and discuss.
We're good with placing those on the warrant, not necessarily our position on whether we support.
Right, exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
We're good.
I'm fine with that.
I will entertain a motion to accept items number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 on this article on this item and carve out the discharge for firearms and the tree protection, tree cutting bylaw.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Kamalo, is that motion in order?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Shula, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Herr, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Frenier, yes.
Ms. Ritterbusch?
Ritterbusch, yes.
Petstone, yes. All right, so let's move on to the, Amy, you said you had something on the tree protection, tree cutting bylaw.
I do. So there were two versions of it that were in the meeting packet, and I can give you a little background. Let's see. So as you probably know, there have been several examples of clear cutting and deforestation in Hopkinton over the last 3 or 4 years, notably for commercial solar, but also for housing developments. And the planning board and I, has heard from many frustrated residents about why the town leaders cannot do more to reduce the impact of these types of things on neighborhoods. And I'm sure select board members have heard from residents too. So the zoning advisory committee had been discussing this at length for the last 2 years. And they had the recommendation recently from town council that a solar overlay district, which they had been hoping to do, probably wouldn't hold up to legal challenges. So this was a complement, but they are going to do they're going to propose a bylaw that would at least strengthen the screening requirements. But this came up as a suggestion from town council that would be a complement to the screening requirements. And many towns have these clear cutting bylaws, and they're not specifically targeted at solar, or they're not to any zoning areas of town, so they can be general bylaws, and which is not really the domain of the zoning advisory committee. It's more the domain of the select board, but it could be a general or a zoning bylaw. And to me, the simpler of the two versions was the non-permitted version. And it essentially, it does not allow clear cutting with limited exceptions, except after the issuance of a building permit, a definitive subdivision approval, or a site plan approval. And so no clear cutting of woodlands would be allowed. Let's see, unless otherwise defined in the article. Let me read too. And it's pretty large. It doesn't seem too cumbersome to me. So the removal in any clear cutting is defined as the removal in any 12-month period of all trees in a woodland of over 20,000 square feet, which is about a half an acre, or the removal of 50% of the tree coverage of any lot greater than 60,000 square feet, which is about an acre and a half. And
This is on private land,
correct.
not town land?
Right. So some towns have had the experience. There's one recently in Holliston. There was another one where someone has completely clear cutted the land, but then the development turns out couldn't be approved because it didn't meet the requirements. So this is just to put that on hold, and then they get all their approvals before they can do their clear cutting.
So both of the draft bylaws that you attached were drafted as zoning bylaws.
Right.
And it's my understanding that Zach has not reviewed them. So perhaps there hasn't been the socialization that we've typically looked at before the regulations are proposed.
That is correct, but there are 3 more months until town meeting. So if we were to put them as a placeholder, they could be removed later or altered.
Yeah, I've got.
So I don't like to jump, well, I shouldn't say that, I do it all the time. I don't mean to jump on my soapbox too often, but there's 3 things in town that I've seen on this board and on my time on the planning board that get us energized more than anything else. Trees, trash, and trails. Those are the 3 things, well, there's a lot, but those are 3 things that really get us going beyond our schools. And that's why I'm surprised that I haven't heard much about this, because trees are one of the things that really gets people energized from a lot of different vantage points. So I can't understand how this is getting a town meeting now when it hasn't been socialized widely and frankly debated pretty intensely across the community. 3 or 4 months before town meetings getting ready to go here. Something just seems amiss here in how this came forward.
I think what was being proposed is really more of a placeholder that we can remove later on, just kind of let it go through the process. My understanding is it has not gone through the process. We still have a few months to go and it could be removed. Am I correct in,
Can't remove it. It just sits there and it's gonna,
Oh, it can be removed later.
once you set the warrant's set. You don't take action on it, but that's not removed.
No, you
So
can
is it-
still remove it up until a certain date.
Mal, is that true?
Ms. Loftus?
It depends. It depends on who proposes it,
Yeah.
as well as the board has the ability to shift things in on the warrant in and out until the warrant is signed. So in this case, if the select board decides to add the warrant, it can take a similar vote to remove it from the warrant, so long as that happens before the warrant is signed.
But this is a zoning bylaw change. Is that correct?
No, it would be a
This is
general.
a general bylaw?
Right. It could be written as a zoning bylaw. So I think if we don't put it on the warrant, the planning board would likely put it on the warrant as a zoning bylaw.
How do the other towns do this, Elaine? Do they use this as a general bylaw or as a zoning bylaw?
Through the chair, I suspect there's a variety of ways that this could be accomplished, both bylaws.
Both avenues?
And this has been reviewed by town council as, as okay, as a general bylaw or even zoning?
I don't think town council's seen anything. We haven't seen anything on this. I don't think town council even knows about it.
Yeah, they wrote the drafts. They wrote the drafts that are in the packet. So
Okay, so they have seen it and they said it's.
correct.
So has town council weighed in on this, Mr. Kamala?
My understanding is that when town council looked at it, it was in the context of this being a zoning bylaw. What I believe is before the vote tonight is that the proposal will be a general bylaw.
Yeah, so he hasn't weighed in on it from a general bylaw perspective. So I'll stop now. We're gonna wade into a big fiasco. We're gonna start talking about trees and people's land. And if you guys wanna go there, I just caution you that you're gonna wade into a big fiasco. It will not be as simple and straightforward as something. And really, this is a zoning issue in my view, and Zach and the planning board should be the ones sponsoring and wading into this, and not the select board, because we got a lot of other big things, financial things for the town and otherwise. And I'm just concerned it's gonna be a big distraction.
I agree with that, Mr. Hur, and I think that it seems to me very rushed, and I would like to not include this in our moving forward. And maybe we can work on it, after, work on it for presentation, all polished up for next year. But I think it's premature at this point. So what do I have to do? Mr. Kamala, would I make a motion to not include that?
Well, I could make a motion to include it, and then you could vote no if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we include a tree preservation general bylaw as a placeholder.
I'm going to second that, but I do want to discuss a little bit more.
Okay, so motion's been made and seconded. So further discussion, Mr. Nasrullah.
So further discussion, I just want to make sure this is something that we can pull back as we kind of let the process play out. I know you've already answered that once, but if as a select board, if we have the opportunity we do have the opportunity to pull this out, right?
Up until what date, Mr. Kamalu?
Yes, it will depend on the date that is set for signing the warrant. As the board is discussing this question from Mr. Nasrallah, I think the board also needs to understand what will it take for this to play out? What does that mean?
Well, that's really what I'm trying to understand. It's like, what is it going to take for this to play out?
So, Paula, was this something that you would discuss with us, or Ms. Ritterbush, the one who brought it to us? Who's the one, who do we get clarification on this? It just seems it's something that's been presented to us very quickly, and I don't like to put things on the warrant, potentially things on the warrant that haven't been vetted by the departments that it kind of pertains to. So who's going to explain it?
Do you want me to take a stab here?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so to me, before this would get to town meeting, we would have the town council, they wrote this one and they said it could be general or zoning, although the one in your packet is zoning. Have them rewrite it as general, and then have, invite the public to come comment on it. Get weigh-in from other boards, and then make our decision whether we want to remove it or not. I will say that this issue has been discussed for over 2 years about the deforestation. So even though it may be new to the select board, it's not new to the public. Has been concerned and coming to all kinds of meetings about this for 2 years. And I think making them wait 1 more year is really too long to not try. That's just me, but.
Someone has done a lot of work on this. I mean, I'm looking at what's in our packet, and someone has put together and done a lot of work on it. Do we know who has done the actual work at putting together this? Because it's got exemptions, it's got hazardous things, it's got residential 35%, agricultural 50%, business and commercial 40%. It's just, there's pages of work that somebody has put together on this. Do we know where it's come from?
It was drafted by town council, not Mr. Mieres, but one of his associates.
It was drafted by town council.
Who
Okay.
directed him to draft it?
It came up in the ZAC discussion, so the zoning advisory.
Mr. Kamala, does the ZAC have access to town council?
Through the town manager's office,
Did you coordinate that with ZAC for the town council, or no?
I may have to refer you to my files. We do track how we authorize town council services. I don't remember this one specifically at this point.
Yeah, this goes to my point I made a few minutes ago, that this thing has just appeared kind of out of nowhere, and something just seems amiss as far as the process goes. Okay, can you find that out, please, Mr. Kamalo? I think it's important that we can't be spending town council money without this board and town manager's office understanding we're spending it. But two, I think for an article like this, we're asked to sponsor. That's what this is about right now. We don't even know where it came from. That just does not make sense to me at all.
If I may, I believe it came up during the discussion on the solar bylaw, and they were reviewing that with town council, and that's how it came about.
So that's a planning board initiative, correct? That's not a select board initiative.
That was in the zoning advisory committee.
Which is a subcommittee of the planning board, so yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with what Mr. Herr and Mr. Tedstone are saying, in that this seems very rushed, but there's been a lot of work put into this. I don't know, I mean, shouldn't this be sponsored by the planning board?
So that's my point exactly, Mr. Nasrullah, is there has been a lot of work put into it, but it has not been through us. And
Right.
I am very uncomfortable sponsoring an article that another department or another board has done the extensive amount of legwork on and handed it to us with basically a 4 days notice to read through it and authorize it. So that's my dilemma. That's my issue with it.
Do we know if the planning board has any objections to sponsoring this?
I don't think they do, but they would sponsor it as a zoning bylaw rather than a general bylaw. But they didn't discuss it at their last meeting because it was on the agenda, but they could meet again before the warrant closes.
Okay.
So I would probably say that if it's going to get on, that the planning board should submit it and not us. So we have a motion and seconded. Discussion pretty much closed on this. Anyone else have anything else to discuss? Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Nasrullah, no.
Mr. Herr,
Her, no.
Ms. Lafreniere,
No,
Ms. Ritterbush,
Ritterbush, yes.
Bedstone, no. So, okay, so that one doesn't carry. So that one will be off of the warrant. Now, Mr. Kamala, should we discuss that discharge of discharge of firearms bylaw here? Or is that a little bit later in the meeting?
Here, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Kamala or Ms. Lazarus, why don't you take us through this bylaw? And I believe that we have, was it Mr. Mastriani? If he's here, we can certainly bring him into the discussion. Phil Mastriani. Mr. Kamala, if you would.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. By way of background, as I mentioned to the board at your last meeting, which was last week, this issue came to our attention through a couple neighbors who were reporting hearing gunfire from an abutting property, and also expressing to the town their safety concerns. We referred the issue to the chief of police, who interacted with the residents, as well as the individual who was actually discharging the firearms. Those discussions led to a proposal by the neighbors or the abutters to submit a petition article to the town that will address the discharge of firearms. Why that was necessary was because of the realization that the neighbors felt that the existing state law was inadequate in addressing the concerns that they were experiencing. And most recently, we received a notice from the abutters that they were uncomfortable moving the petition forward. However, they were wondering if there was another way that the town could get this onto the town warrant. And that's how we then brought it to the select board. In terms of the specifics, included in your packet is the state general law, which basically specifies that it limits to the discharge of firearms to a distance that is greater than 500 feet of a dwelling or other building in use. However, if there is the consent of the owner or the legal occupant, the person who is discharging firearm can do so. So in other words, the key here is one cannot discharge a firearm within 500 feet of a dwelling or other building unless the impacted party consents to that. The proposal, therefore, does the following. Number one, it increases that distance to 1,000 feet from a dwelling or other building. It also adds 300 feet from a public way. It also identifies the authorized discharges. This could be the use of such weapons in the lawful defense of any person, family, or property, any law enforcement officer or member of the armed forces acting within the scope of their lawfully authorized duties, and the use of such weapons on any lawfully permitted target, trap, or skit range. In other words, this proposal does not affect the existing gun ranges in town. The proposal also provides an enforcement provision whereby the police department, if this is approved, is authorized to enforce the provisions of this article. Elaine, is there anything else that needs to be highlighted? With the chair's permission, yeah.
Yes, yep.
No, I think that's a good summary.
Can we bring Chief Bennett into this conversation, please?
And while he's coming up, are there any times involved in this, Mr. Kamalo? Like before, not before a certain time in the morning, not after a certain time in the evening?
So I could barely understand what Brian was saying, but I'm assuming he's asking, are there any time restrictions where this work or this discharge could be allowed? The proposed bylaw does not do that.
But could that be possible following Mass General Law and United States law?
We'll have to run that by town council.
So,
Chair?
yes, Mr. Nasrullah.
One question is, when we talk about 1,000 or 500 feet from nearby dwelling, are we actually considering the house itself, or are we talking about a property line?
The structure, correct, Mr. Kamalo? It's the structure?
Correct.
Okay.
So this would impact hunting significantly in town. But so again, if Chief Bennett is so inclined, I would like to have him on here. But Phil Mastriani, what's on your mind about this article?
Well, I first of all want to say thank you to everyone for bringing this up at this meeting. And I also want to note for the record that I'm from out of town, but I'm married to a townie who's been residing in Hopkins. Take that as an honor. But with that all being said, this has been a matter that's been brewing for about 3 full years now. I've resided in Woodville for 8 years. The first 5 were very peaceful. My wife and I started a family here. I love living in Hopkinton. It's the best town in America. And 3 years ago, I got home from work, and my, at the time, 3-year-old son ran up to me and said, "Daddy, they're shooting guns." We ran inside because we were unsure of what exactly was going on. So that, sort of gives a timestamp on when this began. But basically what's going on, as recently as this spring, I just looked while we were having the rest of the meeting. In March, the town of Hopkinton Police Department on their Facebook page had to do a public post saying we received multiple calls on the Winter Street, School Street, Pond Street area of firearms. There's nothing to be concerned about. And frankly, in regards to the time, Mr. Hare, it's every time of the day. It's Sunday while on my way to church. It's while we're having a birthday party. We have friends that start saying what's going on. It is so loud here. There's basically a 4th shooting range. There's a 4th gun range in Hopkinton, but it's not licensed. There's no rules, and there's a large variety of guns that are being shot. So we're really glad there's many people that came to the meeting at Town Hall before Corona. And frankly, my wife doesn't even want me to be on this call, because if you lived in this neighborhood and I live 1,500 feet away, when this gentleman is shooting, it feels like he's right next door because of the variety of guns and weapons. And we're talking about 100 rounds being shot within about 15 minutes. So really, I want everyone to be aware that this individual is the person who is putting hunting at risk in Hopkinton, not want to just peacefully live in this neighborhood. And I could pick it up later, but I guess that gives you a little insight on what we've been dealing with here the last few years.
Okay. Chief Bennett, are you aware of what Mr. Mastriani is speaking about? Sorry to put you on the spot. Welcome to being our chief.
That's okay. I am aware. In fact, I've spoken with Phil There are other people that have reached out to the police department and in the past, and even is going. Chief Lee worked on this years ago to try to find some amicable solution and wasn't able to. We have responded multiple times to evaluate the safety and lawfulness of the activity and have not determined if anything unlawful is being done. The laws regarding setting up a range and shooting are very loose. In fact, I learned how to shoot by coming to Hopkinton and going to Mass Rock and shooting down there. We reached out to the environmental police and specifically the people who, the gentleman who oversees gun ranges, and we were not able to determine any violations.
Okay. So if this bylaw was to go into effect, it would significantly, if I'm not mistaken, significantly impact the area in town where people that are hunters could go and do their hunting, correct?
I imagine it would. Yes, it doubles the distance from the road and it doubles the distance from buildings.
Okay.
How
So
many
it's
hunting areas do we actually have right now, like legit hunting areas?
quite a bit.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Yep, quite a bit.
Hunting is very active in town.
Yep. Yep.
And I should add that I have no accidents involving outdoor shooting.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes, Mr. Nasrullah.
I believe we had a public meeting that was supposed to start at 7. Does it make sense?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss
If
that?
we're going to conclude this, if I may, with one more item, please.
In just a moment, is it 7 o'clock now?
It's 7:07 according to my clock.
All right, so Mr. Mastriani, if you'll bear with me for just a moment.
No problem.
I have to open this public meeting and then we'll come right back to you.
Thank you very much.
So I call the public hearing to order. This is on Cornell's Irish Pub, request for alteration of premises. The public hearing is being held pursuant to an application by Cornell's Irish Pub at 229 Hayden Row to alter the premises subject to a Section 12 all alcohol on premises license. The alteration of premises would allow a permanent outdoor seating area for 50 people in a fenced area behind the restaurant. At the present time, there's a small outdoor seating area allowed in the current license, plus temporary outdoor dining is allowed in a larger area during the COVID-19 state of emergency. This hearing deals only with the alcohol license. The proposal also requires the site plan review from the planning board. The select board voted to approve this application on December 15th at the time of license renewal, but the ABCC requires that we hold a public hearing. First, we'll hear from the applicant, then we'll take questions from the board members and then open it up to the public. However, Mr. and Mrs. Scanlon, if you could bear with us for a moment, I've opened the meeting. I'm going to go back to our previous article that we're speaking about, agenda item, and then we'll come to you. Are you okay with that, Mr. and Mrs. Scanlon? You're on mute. Ellen, you're on mute if you can hear us.
Okay,
Okay.
now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so are you okay with us going back and finishing off this article and then coming right back to you?
Yeah, that's fine, Ted.
All right, thank you. So we will come back to that hearing. So let's get back to Mr. Mastriani.
Through the chair,
Yeah.
When it comes to the gun permit, I brought this up at previous meetings.
Yep.
Not permit, but gun discharges. And, it's not as though, I'm not trying to say that this is any violation of law, but it's more coming from a nuisance standpoint that, if I want to sit on my patio and hear gunshots, it definitely disturbs the peace. Secondly, there are children and, we have woods back here and they don't know where the property lines are and they can be walking around. And with just a shooting like this, yes, we do fear for safety. No one's been hurt, but I think part of the thing is we don't want anyone to get hurt. and I understand the hunting piece. I just think that there's got to be a way that we can find a middle ground here where we don't have to listen to gunshots all night. I never heard gunshots at 11, 12 o'clock at night from my bedroom. And there's got to be a decent middle ground here where people can hunt, but respect their neighbors.
Absolutely, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. And so I understand. So it sounds like you and Mr. Mastriani are probably dealing with the same individual, because I don't know where Mr. Mastriani lives. I do know where you live, and I know that that Chief Bennett did bring up the School Street, Pond Street, Winter Street triangle in that area. So I'm assuming that Mr. Mastriani lives within, I would say, I normally would say earshot, but I wouldn't. I'm trying not to use the word shot.
So he could be pretty far.
Yeah. But and I'm very, very sympathetic towards your plight, both of you, to Mr. Nasrullah and Mr. Mastriani. My problem is punishing all for just a couple. Where Chief Bennett had said that, you know, they have done investigate. I mean, it's obvious that he knows the address and that he's done investigations on it, and Chief Lee's done investigations. And I would hate to have to penalize all for the actions of one. And I say, meaning I'm just one person on the board. I'm not trying to influence anybody here. You know,
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Chair, we got a letter at the last meeting we talked about, and wasn't that in the Spring Street, Hill Street area, which is another area of town that is having this problem?
I believe it's the same one. That letter wasn't for me. I've never written a letter, but I live on Hill Street, so I believe it's the same one.
Okay, I believe so too.
Well, also, so I mean, I was, as you mentioned, Mr. Tedstone, there is hunting in town. I'd briefly spoken to Chief Bennett, and he was saying that, oh, for coyotes, you have to hunt at night. And so there's all sorts of rules with regard to hunting that I am unaware of. And I think the coyote populations need to be controlled, deer populations. I get all that. I think that I like having a placeholder here so we can open the discussion and try to come up with some ideas that can keep everybody happy. I don't want to punish all the hunters. I think that hunting is needed, and I just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And if I may add, Mr. Tedstone, I don't think anyone in our neighborhood wants to do that either. You know, when we purchased our house, we were well aware that we live in an area where there's a lot of conservation land, and the occasional gunshot is really not an issue. And some of the abutters here are hunters, rightful gun owners, and they're also outraged by this because of the flagrancy, frankly, of this other resident, the bad neighbor, if you will, in the neighborhood, and who's truly forcing the issue. But I would like to say, you know, we want to do this in a way. I don't know if it's a noise violation, because certainly in many towns it would be. I mean, it stops everything. If you're having a conversation, I live 1,500 feet away. I would like to point out to the select board, it's very important. I want to put you on notice if you do choose not to pick this up. There's a general fear in the neighborhood. No one wants to do what I'm doing right now. Okay, no one wants to do that. They're all fearful because they've heard the variety of guns that this person shoots. Also, we're aware from Chief Lee, and that was seconded by when I spoke to Chief Bennett, that the resident wants nothing to do with knowing any of us or talking to any of us. But basically, a handgun can move 900 feet in a second. So, you know, it is a safety measure. Further, it is definitely a mental health issue in the Woodville area. But with all that being said, no one, you know, we don't want to stop hunting, but we can't keep living like this. This is not going to go away. As long as he continues to shoot, ruin our mental health in this part of the town, you know, affect our children's development in this part of the town. And let's not forget, no one truly knows. I was actually at the meeting when Chief Lee was calling one of the officers who did the visit. I'm not as sure about the thoroughness of the fact checking. Like, I don't know, there is a house within 500 feet. I have asked if that house has given written permission. I believe it might be a relative. I was not responded to on that. But this truly is an issue that's not going to go away. And I ask you, we want to work it out amicably, to consider a placeholder, because so many neighbors that live closer than me, I'm still within a shot's distance, okay? But there's so many people that live closer who are scared to speak up because of how loud these weapons are. I had a friend over, he goes, that's not a handgun. I mean, he's shooting automatic weapons. I'm sure Chief Bennett has the full list and he can't tell us what they are. But I can tell you, as the guy who's listening, they're not your standard handgun, hundreds of rounds. And lastly, that, you know, I guess I'm going on a rant here, but basically, this is a matter that's a safety concern. It's a mental health concern. And one way or the other, we don't want to ruin hunting in Hopkinton. It's not us, it's this gentleman. He needs a neighborly neighbor to prevent it. And we ask you to consider doing it because we're all scared. I've had a couple glasses of wine just to come on this tonight, and my wife's not going to speak to me the rest of the night just because of this. It really is a safety issue. Please protect our children. And I will note the answer we got from Chief Lee when he did talk to his officer was that he shoots, and Norman, Mr. Kamala was there, so that he can vouch or not vouch. And I actually asked you, Mr. Kamala, to do this or not. The answer that Chief Lee received when he called up the officer at the meeting was that this resident doesn't shoot towards Hopkinton, he shoots towards Westboro. I'd like to point out two things. Westboro prohibits all firearms. There's no hunting. And secondly, the closest house is actually in Westboro at 650 feet, not Hopkinton. It shouldn't be allowed. That's my last thing. I'm sorry for being so passionate.
Mr. Tedstone.
Yes, sir.
So I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends here with what I'm going to say, but it's the job. Hopkinton has changed in the last 20 years dramatically. Hopkinton has become a far more dense community than it was in the 1980s and 90s, 50s, 60s, 70s, obviously too. And as such, you know, while we have great character, we have lots of open space, we've got our country roads and all those things that we all love. We are much denser, and I hate to use the word, and we are much more like a suburb. And I'm sure the suburbs of Boston have some kinds of rules in effect, laws in effect, bylaws in effect, that allow for people to rightfully discharge their firearms under the US Constitution and Massachusetts Constitution, but at the same time, put some level of public safety in play as well. And I think maybe the step we should take here is to really take a look and ask town council perhaps to help us with this one, because it is a sensitive issue. What is possible in Massachusetts, and what towns do this well already in sort of the metro area, and see what we can come up with as possible ideas. I don't want to get into a situation where the town hall and the select board gets into a dispute with two neighbors. I recognize that the dispute is a public safety issue for a lot of other people, but we've got to be careful that we don't become sort of the tool that others kind of use against one another. So with that, I'd really encourage us to table this for now. I mean, if you want to talk about the, I guess we have to put it on the warrant, right? Or put it as a whole, whatever it's called. But I do think we need a lot more work and research done on this. I just don't know, you know, what's the best way to go about it. But other towns have solved this. The towns on 128 100 years ago hadn't solved this. The towns on 495 are probably haven't solved this now. So it's just one of those things that comes with the evolution of the state.
And I agree with you to a point, Mr. Herr. However, those distances and everything, those are created by, you know, people at the state that deal in this is what they do for a living. And I am totally sympathetic with Mr. Mastriani and the bad neighbor or the irritating neighbor, or whatever it is. And I get that. And my only problem with putting a placeholder or approving a placeholder for this is it can be on the floor, it can be moved where it does turn into something that could impact the hunters, and I have a real problem with us changing the overall hunting district, the overlay district for where people can hunt, where they can't, because of one obstinate neighbor in town. And I'm not downplaying, you know, there are obstinate neighbors that play music too loud, or that put orange fences up, or, you know, swear at you once in a while. And then there are obstinate neighbors that blast 100 rounds of ammunition off at midnight. So I'm very, very sympathetic towards your obstinate neighbor. But I'm afraid that if we are to put a placeholder on this, it could take legs between now and May, and it could massively impact, you know, areas where you can hunt. Just with legacy farms and these other developments being developed, I can tell you that I've had, you know, multiple coyotes within, you know, tens of feet of my front door, with the displacement of all that wilderness out there. They have to go somewhere, and if we are to lessen the area to where hunters can hunt, it's a real concern to me.
Mr. Ted, so may I reply quickly?
Sure,
I'll
go
keep
ahead,
it
Phil.
quick, I promise. So, you know, my uncle-in-law, Bogey, because I know he voted for you. He told me to vote for you when you ran for this. And he's a townie. And he said, Phil, I told him about this 2 years ago. And he said, Phil, you'll never do that. You'll shut the town down. I said, Uncle Pogu, I love this town too, and I want to raise my family here. And I think to Mr. Hare's point, there's the nostalgia of Hopkinton, and I love that too. But the town is allowing development. You can't turn a blind eye to it. And this is not just a nuisance. There are, the town of Hopkinton Police Department had to do a public Facebook post to they were receiving so many calls that they had to put it out on Facebook. So at some point, the town of Hopkinton, to Mr. Poor's point, I love the nostalgic part of it. I want to preserve it. So if it's a noise violation, it's a noise violation. But someone could get hurt, and what about mental health? What about the peace of the residents that live here? Not just the people that want to come to town to shoot. And that's all I'd like to say in response to you, but I appreciate you very much.
All right, thank you, Phil. And your Uncle Pogi is a good guy, and I would be very angry if he were to ever vote for me again. He would not be doing me a favor. So I'm going to cut the
question through the chair.
Go ahead.
This bylaw seems to want to just double the distance from a dwelling, a house, from 500 to 1,000. Just how much of our hunting land, I think we have to really look at that. Is this going to affect? How much land do we have that people can still hunt within 1,000 feet of a house or a dwelling? And how many hunters would be affected by this? I'm not really sure that going from 500 to 1,000 is going to affect that much.
So I would say I can't give you the area or the land, you know, the amount of land, but I can tell you that all hunters would be certainly impacted by it, because it would then force, if this 1,000-foot bylaw was put into place, it would put all the hunters in a much more densely populated area, where you would probably increase the amount of the potential for injury. However, you know, we could kick this around all day long. We're not here to make a decision for the town. All we're here to do is to make a decision. If we think that this placeholder, if we put it on as a placeholder, could it be vetted properly and worded properly to get to town meeting and be done correctly, so we could vote on it at that point? Mr. Kamala, what are your thoughts on that?
Mr. Mastriani has interacted with the town department that are impacted by this discussion. Our discussions have involved the police department, town council, the inspections department, as well as Elaine. One of the steps that we've added to this annual town meeting process is the public hearing meeting, where some of these issues could be discussed. It's difficult to say that those discussions we'll have sufficient time to address some of the issues that might come from those public hearings. I'm somewhat biased in this process because I always say that if anything has to get to town meeting, we need to discuss it the summer before the meeting that town meeting takes it up. So my answer to you in a long-winded way is it's difficult to say whether we have sufficient time to address this issue because we don't know what is going to come up during the public hearing process.
Yeah, I love having this. I have no problem. I know that there are rules, for hunting as far as, an hour before dawn or after dawn or dusk or whatever I'm not a hunter. I don't own a gun. But I know there are rules and regulations to hunting as far as, at 11 o'clock at night, if you were hunting based on, I do feel like I'm an expert because I've watched a lot of Northwood's Law. So I can tell you, if you're blasting off a gun at night during hunting season, McKay is going to come and arrest you and you're going to get into a lot of trouble. But I know the coyotes you can hunt at night. I don't think you don't have to, but you can hunt at night. I believe. I don't know. And I'm certainly not an expert in this, and I don't like to get too deep into it, although we're really deep into it at this point. I like the potential of making it a noise ordinance, but I don't know if it's going to be ready for prime time this year. I think that we could probably, get the people in town that need to get together and figure out a way that we can present this so it's not to impact the hunting community. My initial, when it was first brought to us last week, I was thinking that it was somebody that bought a house next to the gun club and wanted the gun club shut down, and that's absolutely not the case. And Phil, you've presented a very solid case, and I'm very sympathetic towards, when you bring up the mental health aspect of it and the neighbor that almost flippantly will do it in your face because he knows that he can do it and not get in trouble. I get that. And I'm sympathetic towards it for sure. But like I said, I'm having a hard time punishing all for the actions of one. But that's my spiel. So are we
voting on keeping a placeholder or
yes.
are we, okay. So Mr. Chair, I move that we retain the placeholder for the gun discharge.
So I'm sorry, you cut out there for a moment on me. Your motion was to keep it as a placeholder?
Keep it as a placeholder, yes.
Okay. Is it seconded?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Nasser.
Sorry,
Yes.
Brendan. Mr. Kamal, so, trying to be consistent, because we talked about this a few minutes ago or several minutes ago now about the other issue, the tree bylaw, and not having it come through us. We've had this issue come before us on occasion now for a while. Is that a fair statement?
In various forms, yes.
How long would it take town council to do a review of similar communities with similar challenges and what they've done to address them? I can't imagine that would take months to do.
No, in fact, part of the work that town council has done to date included that. In fact, the model that town council used was one that was recently approved. I believe, was it North Reading or Reading, one of those towns?
And would
And so
that
yes, town
help
council
the
has looked at other
situation?
towns. Yeah.
Do you I guess we can't get into all that now. Okay. All right. So I guess, I'm concerned about putting this off because I do think it's a legitimate issue for the community as a whole, despite the fact that we have a couple of neighbors, obviously, that are not pleased with each other at the moment. I do think it's a community-wide issue. I think the timing of discharging guns is also an issue that we should talk about as part of whatever we figure out. Can't imagine why you have to be out at 12 o'clock at night shooting a gun. Just can't imagine. I'm like you, Brendan, I'm not a hunter. I don't own a gun. So I'm sure I'll get some emails about that. But
both will.
Yeah.
But that's kind of,
But I would like to try and figure this out for this year if we're within a reasonable timeline and if we can socialize this concern and concept widely between now and town meeting. I don't want to rush it though. I don't want to do a tree bylaw thing and just have it pop up on our desk one day and say, let's put it in place tomorrow. So that's what I'm a little concerned about. If you think we can pull it off, I'd be interested in doing it and I'd support, the placeholder for now. If you don't think we can pull it off, there's no chance. I'd want to talk to town council about why there's no chance, by the way. But if there's no chance, then tell us that now too.
So I agree with you, Mr. Herr. And Mr. Kamala, we do have until we sign the warrant to pull this, correct?
Correct.
So I guess I would make a motion, or a friendly amendment to Mr. Nasrullah's motion, that if we don't have a clear and concise article by the time it's time to sign the warrant, that we remove it.
I accept that friendly amendment.
And what would that date be?
That's to be determined.
No, we got to sign the warrant by a certain date.
Yeah. We have that date. If you give us a moment, do you have the timeline, Elaine?
Warrant closes February 2nd.
I'm getting that in a second.
Budget hearings.
So that's,
The board signs it on April 13th.
okay. We got some
All right.
time.
So that gives 3 months. 3 months for everybody to work together and get it in shape. If by April 15th it's not 100% clear and concise, then the board's in agreement to pull it, correct?
I'm accepting your friendly amendment.
Right. Yep.
So I think we need to vote on it first. So
Right.
So who seconded that? Who seconded the
I
motion?
did.
You accept that amendment?
No, I didn't. I will second the amendment.
All right. So any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Nasrullah, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Her, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Frenier, yes.
Ms. Ritterbusch?
Rita Bush, yes.
Headstone, yes. So, so Phil, you're still in play. So there's quite a bit of work to do in front of us to make sure that it is clear and concise and dare I say bulletproof for the town meeting. But we will work on it with you. Okay.
I want to say thank you to everyone, and I look forward to doing that. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. And go kill that last glass of wine. Your wife.
I was
won't
going to
hate-
say, fair enough. There you go. Thanks again, guys, and have a great rest of the meeting.
You too. All right. So moving back.
Mr. Chair, can I just make one quick comment? Mr. Kamalo, can you please look into the timelines on anything we might be able to put in place as far as early AM and late PM? I think that's what I hear about. I haven't heard about this particular issue directly, but I have heard across the town, how can the gun ranges be doing this at 11 o'clock at night? That makes no sense. I'm just curious about that. That's all.
We
Gun ranges.
through the chair, yes, we will look into that. However, we do have the times for the gun ranges. I believe it's
This doesn't have anything to do with the gun ranges, though.
yeah.
Right, but just the timeline in general, I'm curious about. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So if we could liven up Miss Scanlon, Eleanor Combs Scanlon.
Hi, Ellen Scanlon for Cornell's Irish Pub, and Erin Trites is also on Zoom.
All right. Hello to both of you. So Ellen, why don't you bring us through, I know that we've already voted to approve it, and this is kind of a formality by the ABCC, but bring it to us, tell us what you're doing, what you want to do, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I basically want to keep what the governor gave us during the virus, the extra outdoor seating. I just want to put a permanent fence, which, the fire exit doors, which were in the plans. And I just figure that even after this virus is gone, people do enjoy sitting outside eating in the summertime. And we're very conscious of noise, and we only have low background music. It's the same as people coming in if they were going to sit inside or outside. There's the same amount of cars in the car park. So I'm just basically asking just to keep what I have, because who knows? Nobody knows how long this is going to last. So, and even when it's finished, please God, we'd still like to have the outdoors, because it's just people just find it very comforting.
Yep. Great. Board member.
Sorry, Erin, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that it worked out really well this past summer, and to make it more permanent would just be so awesome. The whole community loved it.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Treitz and Mrs. Scanlon. Board members, any questions? Mr. Nasrullah.
I have none. I think it worked out great. And yeah,
Okay.
just making the temporary permanent.
Yep. Mr. Herr?
Are there outdoor speakers to that area now?
Yes, there are outdoor speakers, but there were always outdoor speakers even prior to us being allowed to have the temporary, because we always had that smaller outdoor patio, the white fenced in one, and there was always speakers out there since as long as I've been there. So they're the normal speakers.
Mr. Kamalo or Ms. Lazarus, is their entertainment license the same hours as their liquor license?
I believe it's the same.
Same. Could you separate the two, and could they turn the music off at 10 o'clock at night or 10:30 at night or something like that? Could we separate the two?
If the
The
board so
board
wishes.
sets the hours.
Mr. Scanlon, what about that idea? Because there is some concern about noise in the area. You guys have rock. So I go to Cornell's every now and then. Music doesn't seem to. I don't think about music in Cornell, so I don't notice the music being loud. But I'm wondering, could you do something separate on the outside speaker system and shut it down at a certain time or something like that, or would that impact your business?
We already have a separate volume for the outdoor speakers, so we could always turn it down to a more reasonable level, even without turning them off or turning them off. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't even affect inside. So we could adjust the volume.
Would that bother you guys to do something like that, or is that not a big deal?
To turn it off or turn it down?
Turn it down.
Turning it down wouldn't be a big deal. No, I think turning it off, right now, where there was a curfew and it didn't really matter. But when life does hopefully go back to normal, we will still have the license till 1 a.m. So I can see loud music being, kind of a pain. So turning it down wouldn't be bad.
Okay. Good, Mr. Herr?
Yeah, I think we got to try and figure that out a little bit as we go through this process. But this is a public hearing, right? So.
Yep. Mary Jo?
I have frequented there this summer when it was outdoors, and I found it to be rather delightful, actually. And I think a good fence is a great idea, and I don't really have a problem with it. The parking didn't change, and she's going to put the exits in there and everything, and I think it's fine with me.
Okay. Ms. Ritterbusch?
A question about the fencing. So it's going to be a more permanent fence. Will there also be some bollards or something to prevent cars from accidentally driving into the seating area?
Yes, if you look at the plans, it's already all in the plans. There's 3 exit doors. It's the same white fencing that's there right now in the original outdoor patio. And then there'll be bollards up against all around the fence.
Okay, thank you.
Where
And then
the
I'd be
park is
interested to,
Sorry.
I'm glad there'll be ballards. I'd be interested to hear from the public too before.
Okay.
We finish.
Okay. So we will now go to the public comments or questions. I know that there was a gentleman, and just bear with me for a moment. So if we could go ahead and liven up Mr. Rocky. And Mr. Arakilian. Those are,
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay.
And you're Mr. Rocky?
Correct.
The floor.
Okay. So I kind of sent a letter in, but I just kind of like to give you some thoughts of what me and my wife have had since the temporary has been allowed. So, you know, basically members of the board, me and my wife would like to express our opposition to allowing Cornell's to erect a permanent outdoor seating area. During the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, Cornell's was allowed to set up temporary outdoor seating to allow the business to make up for lost seats in the building due to the state of Massachusetts' social distance regulations. The temporary seating area has brought to light what this would look like if made permanent. We've experienced a lot more loud noise until late at night, loud music until late at night, and a considerable amount of extra traffic later at night. While we do not want to affect Cornell's business during these tough times we are living through, the business must also realize that this is also a neighborhood with residents and must be considered of their impact on us as well. We do appreciate the board allowing us to voice our opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rocky. Mr. Arakilian.
Yes, sir. To the board, for those people that say that made their comments, you people don't live across the street like Eric and I do, so you don't hear the whole story. I have a three-part question, and please hear me out. Paragraph 2 of the certified letter I got says the applicant is seeking to approve install of fence, tables, and tents. Well, they already had a temporary fence, tent, and tables. I asked the building department where was their permit to erect such a temporary thing. There was no permit pulled. So this town is very strict because I've built 4 houses here. I have my construction supervisor's license. So I don't know how they erected a temporary fence and a tent during the summer. It's taken down now for the winter. So I don't know how they erected it without a permit to do that. That's part 1. The second part is I read the packet, and I'm an engineer, and I disagree with some of the comments they made about concerning back on November 25th. If you people are gonna allow them to have a permanent fence and tent, where is the design for structural loads and everything? Because when I went out there and during the summer, there was no outrigging ropes or things to control the tent from collapsing. There's nothing that prevents a car from driving up and knocking the fence down. Putting one of those parking curbs, like it was mentioned in the packet, is not enough to stop a car from going through, jumping over that little parking curb, that little piece of granite or whatever. And the third thing is we've had to call the police after they closed. There's been young kids and older people yelling and swearing. The police have had to come down a few times. And then when you people are cleaning the bar, the jukebox, the stereo is blasting so loud that I have to close my windows in the summer, and I can still hear it through the windows. And currently, right now, looking outside, they have floodlights. It looks like I'm at Gillette Stadium. I don't know why there's lights on for security in the back where they had the temporary fence and things. So I don't know why. My blinds are closed and the light still permeates that. And the last thing is the clientele, I feel, is not the same as it was when they first took over the bar. There's people at night that leave rubber, motorcycles with loud exhaust, leaving rubber at 2 o'clock in the morning. And when the crew was cleaning up, like I said, I can hear the stereo blasting. So with the increase of traffic, with the increase of seating capacity, I understand the COVID and, to let more people in. I'm not against the business, but I just think that there's just going to be more traffic and more noise for the people that live across the street. And that's my 2 cents. Over.
Thank you. Mr. Kamalu, I believe in regards to his comment on permitting a fence, I believe that was something that we did speak about at a selectmen's meeting. And it was determined that there just needed to be some type of delineation, and the fence didn't need to be an engineered fence. I believe, if I remember correctly, that we did make that decision, where I know that people had said they wanted 8-foot high chain link, or double Jersey barriers, and I think that one board member actually made the quote that said, "I don't care if that fencing could be a cone and some string." So I don't believe that there was any type of permitting required, and that's probably all under the guise of the Governor Baker's state of emergency. Your thoughts?
Yeah, on the question regarding whether the installation was without a permit, I will check with the building inspector. I specifically remember visiting the site with Elaine, Chuck, as well as the fire chief to go through the setup for the temporary outdoor seating. So I don't have the answer as to what permits were required and whether those were issued. With regards to the designs for structural loads, this request has been reviewed by all the town's permitting departments, and I'll let Elaine comment on that if we received any adverse comments. And then the calls to the police department, we can also follow up with the police chief, who the police department did give their input with regard to the permit application, the current application before the board.
Yep.
Mr. Tedstone, can I get Aaron to answer some of those questions that the previous person had about Cornell's, about the loud music and the lights? And
yeah, if you want.
I mean, I had a conversation with Eric before. He had come over and had expressed there was a situation the night before with 2 guys, and the police did respond, and there was a fight, and he had come over the next day to talk about it. And I had left that conversation, and I thought he did too. We were totally in agreement that, if he had a problem moving forward with loud music or noises outside, that he could absolutely feel free to call the bar phone. And I even offered to give him my cell phone number and the other girls, and we would take care of it right away before, having to escalate it to calling the police, because I'm sure they have, other things to do. And so, and he hasn't called the police, and it's been pretty quiet for the past couple months. So was pretty shocked to hear that he wrote a letter, because I thought that it was kind of squashed in that sense. And again, like I said, we're totally willing to turn down the music, and he can call anytime. And Mike is actually blowing my mind, because he comes in a few times for pizza over COVID and could have absolutely talked to any of us about what he thought was going on, and we could have absolutely addressed it. In reference to music blasting all night, we're on a curfew. We're not there all night. We're there cleaning, and then we get out of there. And prior to COVID, we're open till 1 a.m. and that's our license. And it's I don't understand what more. I just feel like it's all of a sudden, like during COVID, they've been people. Mike again is totally out of the blue, but like I said, I talked to Eric, and I don't really know why this is coming up again.
Yep. Okay.
Mr. Tedstone, I would also like to address the issue about the tents out back and the chairs and the tables. We did every single thing that the town of Hopkinton asked us to do, and a lot more on top of it. Chuck, the fire department, the police department, Norman, everybody, the health department was there, and everybody gave us approval because of the COVID.
Yep.
And that's why there's no like physical original permit, because it was because of what was happening. But we did every single thing that the town of Hopkinton told us to do.
And the building inspector. No, I appreciate that. All right, so board discussion, let's see.
Mr. Chair, should we vote to close the public hearing?
Yes, that was my next motion here.
So, Mr. Chair, I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Are there any other members of the public, Mr. Chair, that are interested in speaking to us? You know?
Let me see who we got here. Attendees, full attendees. Nope, that was it.
Okay.
So, all right, so it has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? And this is just to close the meeting. Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Mr. Rulli, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Or yes?
Ms. Lafreniere?
Renee, yes.
Ms. Ritterbusch?
Ritterbusch, yes.
Redstone, yes. So board, is there any discussion? Mr. Nasrullah?
So I like the idea that Mr. Herr had about limiting, turning the music down at certain hours. I think that the lights as well. Maybe I would support turning the lights down at some point. Obviously, they need to clean up, but if it's becoming a nuisance for the neighbors.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Herr?
Yeah, I support Cornell's increasing their outdoor space. I would like to try and find a way to formally help with the noise mitigation, and if there's light spilling off from the property, that as well. And I don't know if we can do that in this motion, Mr. Kamalo, or if that's a separate issue that you think we should take up at the next meeting. But in general, I support what they want to do, but I hear what the neighbors are saying. And I know there's a couple other neighbors in the area that have said some stuff. So, let's just try and, I know Ellen and Aaron and Colin and everybody want to be neighborly. So I think we can figure that out. But I don't know if this is the time, Mr. Kamalo, for that piece of it, or should we just approve the footprint and so forth and move on with that and come back to this noise mitigation in another time, or do you want to do it now?
I would recommend to the board that if the board is inclined to approve the permit, that it specifies the conditions regarding noise and lighting as part of that approval.
For the outdoor seating area.
Correct.
Do we have to approve it tonight, or could it wait till the next meeting to work out the noise and light?
I would, I would say that we would approve it tonight. I mean, the motion's on the table, so let's get through it, and I'm sure our next agenda is going to be full, and I don't like kicking things off if we can take care of it today. We have Ms. Scanlon on now. I've found her to be very amenable to historically to any type of suggestions or issues that we've had. And we have her and Ms. Treitz on here now. So what are your thoughts, Mr. Herr, on so you throw your thoughts out and I will talk.
Yeah, so let's try it in the form of a motion so we can try to move this thing along. I move that the select board approve the expanded outdoor seating to a permanent status for Cornell's Irish Pub under two conditions. One, that at 10 p.m. No noise is to, I don't know how noise travels. Does it radiate, or no noise is to be heard off premises? So they have to turn the music and whatever else down at 10 p.m. And secondly, that no light should be illuminating off the parcel after 11 p.m. or something like that. 11 p.m.
I second that.
So
light is already not allowed off the parcel per planning board regulations, right?
I don't know.
There's signs though, isn't it? For lighting up signs.
No. The sign has been there for a long time. The lighting, I think he's referring to, is it security lighting? Because they do have to have nighttime security lighting somewhere.
They just have to point it. They got to point it in such a way. I mean, lighting can be directed. They just
Right.
got to turn it over.
Right.
But that's all I'm asking there. I think we need to be sensitive to the neighbors' concerns about light. No one likes big lights blasting through their windows. So if they can figure out how to do that, I'm sure that's possible, and especially in this expanded seating area up back. And secondly, if they're amenable to the 10 p.m. Turn down, so they can still have the music going, they just can't have it blasting, and then people cannot kind of wind down over the next couple hours.
One thing about the reality of the music, though, is you turn the music down, the people, I mean, the louder the music is, the louder people are speaking. But then
Right.
at night, when you turn the music down, people keep speaking loud. I don't know. But I'll go with the turn it down. I don't know how else to address it.
I also think the fencing is going to help. I mean, all summer they've had the outside with the open fencing, and it's been open and people have been out there. And with actual fencing, that should help cut the noise down a bit.
The final point I would make is that, we're doing this evening. If this motion were to pass and they can proceed with their, expanded outdoor seating, and they've got, conditions on that outdoor seating. And then next November, December, the select board is going to reissue the next license for the following year. And if there have been problems, the select board can address those problems at that time and say, if you want your license for 2022, you need to do something different and different than that. So how we manage the process.
Mr. Kamalo, is it appropriate for me to ask Mrs. Scanlon and Mrs. Trites if they are amenable to our suggestions, our motion?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't put it as if they're amenable, because by the end of the day, it's up to the board to decide what conditions to put in. They may have some input.
So can I ask if they have any objections to the parameters which we've set?
Yes.
Well, sorry. I just want to say that about the lighting is we have
Ellen,
to have certain lighting because
Ellen, hold
of
on.
security.
Ellen, hold on for just a moment, okay?
Okay.
Mr. Kamalo.
Elaine, feel free to correct me here if this is the standard condition that the planning board puts. I think what the board is saying that the establishment will prevent any light trespass, meaning that there will be no direct illumination going beyond the property boundaries of the establishment.
That's on the aiming of the light fixture. I know that more modern light fixtures have the ability to contain the overspray of light versus some of the older ones. As long as their light on their building isn't pointed directly towards the neighbors' homes, as long as it's pointed downward, we're okay with that, correct?
That's the question I was posing to the board. And Elaine, is that the language that is used by the planning board?
So no light off the premises would be consistent with that.
Yeah.
And this also will go through the planning board site plan review process too. So the board could make it contingent upon that as well.
All right, so we have a motion. Ms. Scanlon,
Yes.
you were going to tell us something about your lighting.
I just want to say the lighting where the sign, for Cornell's, it's always been there. There's a big light over that, but it shines directly onto the sign. There's security lighting for our cameras because we have to have cameras for our insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
And and their street lights belong to the town of Hopkinton that run through the property as well. And also I'm just worried because my insurance won't cover me if somebody falls outside, when they go to their car or something and hurt themselves. That's what our cameras are for. But if there's no lighting there, it's a waste of time. But I will agree with Mr. Herr. We will do everything in our power to turn down some lights, maybe move them in another direction or something to help the neighbors.
That's awesome. That's all we wanted to hear. So we have a motion on the table. Has it been seconded?
Yep.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
If the board is okay, there could be also a third condition, which Elaine said, and that you'll condition the approval on the planning board approving the site plan for the establishment.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Herr, do you accept that friendly amendment?
That's a little bit of bureaucracy for me, but that's fine.
Fine by me too.
Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Ms. Rulli, yes.
Mr. Herr,
Yes.
Mr. Frenier,
In front of you, yes.
Ritterbusch,
Ritterbusch, yes.
that's Stone, yes. Great, thank you. All right, public hearing. What time is this Verizon public hearing supposed to kick off?
I think it was part of the 7 o'clock public hearing.
Perfect. So I guess we'll open it now. I will call the public hearing to order. The public hearing is being held pursuant to a petition from Verizon to install a new utility pole on Wilson Street. The new pole would be located at 1,700 feet north of the East Main Street intersection. I note that there is no outstanding issue raised by the permitting team. First, we will hear from the applicant. Then we will take questions from board members and open up to public comment. Donald Boner, if you are there, we can liven your mic up and tell us what you're proposing.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. This, I know it says 1,755 feet from the center line because that's the closest road. But what's essentially happening here is across the street from the existing telephone pole, there's a guy wire that it's attached to, but it's attached to a tree on the other side of the road, and that's never a good thing. So safety-wise, they want to put a pole on the other side of the road instead, and they would, instead of the tree attachment, and so to keep the pole in place and to keep it stationary. That way, if the tree falls down, the pole doesn't go with it and block the road.
Okay. Board members, any questions? Mr. Nasrullah. Nope, Mr. Nasrullah is not there. Mr. Herr, we'll come back to Nasrullah. Mr. Herr.
I have no questions, thanks.
Ms. Lafreniere.
I have no questions.
Ms. Ritterbusch.
No questions.
Mr. Nasrullah.
No questions.
All right, so I do. So we have in the past not allowed poles to be put across the street for this purpose. I understand that there's a guy wire that is now going across the street on Wilson Street and going into a tree. Is there a reason, Mr. Boner, why you want to put a pole up to replicate this, whereas probably my thought is the right thing to do would be to put a pole in, maybe run it deeper or however you guys do it, however you engineer it, so it would eliminate the need for the guy wire.
I can't speak to the engineering behind it. This is what the engineers came up with. Could they? I suppose that's possible. I can bring it back and see if they can re-engineer it to put it deeper. I just don't know where the tension goes, the turn of the road, how that affects it. There's obviously a bunch of different things that affect the engineering behind it. I can only assume that initial guy wire was put there for a reason, to pull it in that general direction away from, its leaning tendency. So that is probably why they designed it that way, to pull it to that side of the road. But again, I'm making assumptions from what I've seen in the past, not from my engineering expertise.
Okay. All right, great. Are there any members from the public here that want to comment? Just bear with me for a moment here. I'll call up my list here, full attendee list. I don't see anybody, so seeing nobody. So I would be inclined to ask you to go back to your engineering people and figure out a way to make it so you're not adding an additional pole, and to engineer it properly so it could be a standalone pole. And it's impossible to do that, I would ask you to come back and tell us why it's impossible to do that. So I guess I would like to continue the public hearing until you have time to go back and speak to the people that can make those decisions and those determinations, and then come back before us. Is the board amenable to that suggestion?
I am.
Mr. Nasrullah, Mr. Herr?
Okay.
Ms.
I
Lafreniere?
am. Yeah, I am.
Mr. Ritterbusch?
That's fine.
Okay. Mr. Boner, are you good with that?
Absolutely, yeah. If you're just tabling it, I can try and get you an answer within the week so that maybe you can put it on the next meeting agenda or the one after that if it's too full.
Yep. Yeah, we seem to have meetings every couple of days now, so get back to us as soon as you can. We'll get you back on the agenda. So the public hearing is continued. It's not closed. So therefore, there's no action to be done right now. So we will await your return, Mr. Boner.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's see. So now we are on liaison reports, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. Mr. Nasrullah,
I have none.
Mr. Herr,
Nothing to report.
Ms. Lafreniere,
Nothing to report.
Ms. Ritterbusch.
I'll just add that I've heard that the Chinese American Association of Hopkinton is having a Chinese New Year celebration in February. So we should be expecting an invitation to that. I'm not sure of the details yet.
Thank you. And I have none. Future board agenda items, Mr. Nasrullah,
None here.
Mr. Herr,
No, thanks.
Ms. Lafreniere,
No.
Ms. Ritterbusch.
Nope.
I have none. Mr. Nasrullah.
Chair, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, the town manager report.
Oh.
Skip.
Miss, yep.
Mr. Kamalo.
All right, Mr. Kamalu. So we're going to table that motion to adjourn for now. And we're going to let Mr. Kamalu very quickly do his town manager report.
Yeah.
Elaine, I was ready to celebrate that last motion. Main Street Corridor Project, quickly, we're continuing to meet with the chamber in terms of ramping up our communications to the public vis-a-vis the construction and likely disruption to the traffic on Main Street. The bus DOT crews already started the survey work, and the contractor continues to submit the shop drawings for review by VHB to make sure that they line up with the expectations of the town as we approve the project. And then finally, consultations are beginning with the Historic District Commission to review and select the fixtures that will be installed along Main Street in the district. I'm also, any questions?
Nope.
I'm also requesting a hiring freeze exception with respect to hiring 2 police officers, replacing recent resignations by officers who have moved to larger communities, as well as filling the executive assistant position here in the town manager select board's office. This is a position that you know is our frontline position, very key to the projects that we're embarking on, town meeting, budget process, as well as producing the annual report. We have had Vasuta help us on a temporary basis, but I believe given the fact that this is the executive office for the town, we need to have somebody full-time in that position.
This is the replacement for Maria, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's see. I would request a motion. Board, do you have any comments on this? This isn't creating any.
As long as they're not new hires, it's fine.
They're not new positions. They're back. They're simple backfills.
Not new positions, right?
So I will request a motion to approve the hiring of 2 police officers and the executive assistant to the town manager.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Nasrullah, how do you vote?
Well, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Herr, yes.
Ms. Lafreniere?
Lafreniere, yes.
Ms. Ritterbush?
Ritterbush, yes.
Headstone, yes. Mr. Mr. Kamalo, is that all you got?
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Nasrullah, getting back to your motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none. How do you vote, Mr. Nasrullah?
Nasrullah, yes.
Mr. Herr?
Yes, good night.
Mr. Frenier?
Prettier, yes.
Ritterbush?
Ritterbush, yes.
Headstone, yes. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.